Chapter 3 Maple Avenue, Cambridge, 27 October, 6 o'clock a.m. One by one, all 7 of the graduate students decided to take Vindrake up on his offer. They collected data, they wrote out descriptions of their research, and they sent letters and information to Alison Bender at Nanogen. One by one, they were informed that Nanogen would fly them to Hawaii. And for simplicity, they would travel as a group. As October ran to its end, their days were devoted to preparations for departure. All 7 had a lot to do. Finishing experiments, getting the research projects in shape to leave them for a while, and, of course, packing. They planned to leave early on a Sunday morning out of Boston's Logan Airport, with a connection through Dallas, arriving in Honolulu that same afternoon. They would be, by general agreement, stay 4 days, returning toward the end of the week. Early on a gray, cold Saturday morning, the day before the flight, Peter Jansen was in his apartment, looking at his computer. Erica Mole was there too, cooking bacon and eggs and singing, "Take a Chance on Me." Peter abruptly realized that he had forgotten to turn on his phone that morning. He turned it off the night before, when Erica had unexpectedly shown up. He turned on the phone and placed it on his desk. A minute later, the phone buzzed. It was a text message from his brother Eric. "Don't come." He stared at the message. Was this a joke? Has something happened? He typed back, "Why not?" He watched the screen, but there was no answer. After a few minutes, he dialed Eric's number in Hawaii, but got his voicemail. "Eric, it's Peter. What's up? Call me." From the kitchen, Erica said, "Who are you talking to?" "Nobody. Just trying to get my brother." He scrolled to the message from his brother. It had come in at 9:49 p.m. So it had arrived last night, which had been afternoon in Hawaii. Peter dialed his brother again, but again got voicemail. He hung up. "Breakfast is almost ready," Erica said. He brought the phone to the table, set it beside his plate. Erica wrinkled her nose. She didn't like phones at meals. She was scooping eggs onto his plate, saying, "I followed my grandmother's recipe, with milk and flour." The phone rang. He grabbed it. "Hello?" "Peter," a woman's voice. "Peter Jansen?" "Yes, speaking." "It's Alison Bender," she said, "from Nanogen." He had an image of the blonde woman with her arms around Eric's waist. "Listen," she said. "How soon can you get over here to Hawaii?" "We're scheduled to fly tomorrow," he said. "Can you come today?" "I don't know, It's important." "Well, I can check the flights." "Actually, I took the liberty of booking you on one that leaves in 2 hours. Can you make it?" "Yes, I think." "What's this about?" "I'm afraid I have some disturbing news, Peter." She paused. "It's about your brother." "What's about him?" "He's missing." "Missing?" He felt dazed. He didn't understand. "What do you mean, missing. Since yesterday, Ellison said. There was a boating accident. I don't know if he told you that he brought a boat. A Boston whaler. Anyway, he did, and he was out yesterday on the north side of the island, and he had mechanical difficulties. There was big surf crashing against the cliffs. The engines lost power. The boat drifted in. Peter felt lightheaded. He pushed the plate of eggs away. Erica was watching him, her face pale. How do you know this? He said. There were people on the cliffs. They saw the whole thing. And what happened to Eric? He tried to start the engines. He couldn't. The surf was high. The boat was going to be smashed on the cliffs. He dived into the ocean and swam for shore. But the currents, he never made it to shore. She took a breath. I'm very sorry, Peter. Eric's a good swimmer, Peter said. Strong swimmer. I know, and that's why we continue to hope he'll return, she said. But the police have told us that, well, the police would like to talk to you and go over everything with you as soon as you get here. I'm leaving now, he said, and hung up. Edgar had gone to the bedroom and brought his bag, already packed for the following day. We'd better go, she said, if you're going to make that flight. She put her arm around his shoulder, and they headed downstairs to the car. Chapter 4. Makapu'u's Point, Oahu, 27 October, 4 o'clock p.m. It was said to be a tourist spot. Makapu'u Point, high cliffs on the northeastern tip of Oahu, with a spectacular view of the ocean in all directions. But once there, Peter was not prepared for the barren desolation of the place. A harsh wind whipped the scrubby green brush at his feet and tugged at his clothes, forcing him to lean forward as he walked. He had to speak loudly. Is it always like this? The policeman beside him, Dan Watanabe, said, No, sometimes it's very pleasant. But the trades kicked up last night. Watanabe wore way-bands. He pointed to the lighthouse off to the right. That's Makapu'u Lighthouse, he said. Automated years ago. Nobody lives there anymore. Directly ahead, they looked down the black lava cliffs at surging ocean 200 feet below. The surf boomed, smashing against the rocks. Peter said, Is this where it happened? Yes, Watanabe said. The boat ran around over there. He pointed to the left, but the Coast Guard got it off the rocks this morning, before it broke up in the surf. So his boat was somewhere offshore when it got into trouble. Peter looked out at the ocean, which was rough, high swells and white caps. Yes, he was drifting in the water for a while, witnesses said. Trying to start the engine? Yes, and drifting towards the surf. And what was the mechanical difficulty? Peter said. I understand it was a new boat. Yes, couple of weeks old. My brother was experienced with boats, Peter said. My family always had a boat on Long Island Sound. So we were out there every summer. These waters are different, Watanabe said. You're looking at deep ocean. He pointed. Nearest land out there is 3,000 miles away. the mainland. But that's not the point. It's pretty clear what got your brother in trouble was ethanol. Ethanol? Peter said. State of Hawaii puts 10% ethanol into all the gas that's sold here. But the ethanol screws up small engines. There's cut-rate gas dealers who put way too much ethanol in their gas, up to 30%. It clogs fuel lines, and anything rubber or neoprene can turn to gunk. It's caused a hell of a mess on boats. People have to put in new steel fuel tanks and lines. Anyway, we think that's what happened to your brother. The carburetors were clogged. The fuel pump might have failed. Whatever it was exactly, he couldn't restart the engines in time. Peter was staring down at the water below, greenish nearest the shore. Then farther out, deep blue with white caps, blown by wind. How are the currents here? He said. Depends, Watanabe said. A good swimmer can manage on most days. The problem is finding a place to get out of the water without getting cut up on lava. Ordinarily, you'd swim west, trying to make it to Makapu'u beach over there. He pointed to a sandy strip half a mile away. My brother was a strong swimmer, Peter said. So I heard, but the witnesses said they couldn't see him after he dived in the water. There was big surf that day, and he disappeared into the foam. They lost sight of him right away. How many people saw him? 2. There was a couple picnicking right by the edge of the cliff. There were some hikers too, and some other people, but we haven't been able to locate them. What do you say we get out of this wind? He started. Back up the hill. Peter followed. I think that finishes our work here, Watanabe said. Unless, of course, you want to see the video. What video? The picnicking couple shot some video. Once they realized the boat was in trouble, they recorded about 50 minutes of tape, including the jump from the boat. I didn't know if you wanted to see that or not. I want to see it, Peter said. They were on the second floor of the police station, looking at a tiny screen on a video camera. It was noisy in the station, and busy, and Peter had difficulty focusing on the screen. The first images showed a man of about 30, sitting on the green grassy hillside, eating a sandwich. Then a woman of roughly the same age, drinking a Coke and laughing, waving the camera away. That's the couple, Watanabe said. Grace and Bobby Choi. First part is them horsing around. Goes about 6 minutes. He pushed the fast forward button, then paused the video, and said, It's time-stamped. The stamp in the screen showed the time was 3:12 p.m. Now here, you see, Bobby pointing offshore. He spotted the boat in trouble. The camera panned to show the ocean. The white hull of the Boston whaler bobbing against the blue horizon. The boat was still 100 yards offshore, too distant for him to make out his brother. The camera panned back to Bobby Choi, who now was looking through binoculars. When Peter next saw the boat, it was much closer to the shore. Now he could make out the figure of his brother, bent over, intermittently appearing, then disappearing again. I think he was trying to clear the clogged lines, Watanabe said. That's what it looks like. Yes, Peter said. The camera now showed Grace Choi, shaking her head, trying to place a cell phone call. Then it panned back to the boat, closer now to the right surf. Then back to Grace Choi, shaking her head as she talked on the phone. You don't have good cellular reception up there, Watanabe said. She's called 911, but couldn't get through for a while. The call kept breaking up. If she'd gotten 911, they would have called the Coast Guard right away. The camera work was jerky, but Peter saw something that, hold it, what? Pause it, Peter said quickly. As the image froze, he pointed to the screen. Who's that in the background? The screen showed a woman dressed in white, standing on the hill a few yards above the Chois. The woman stared intensely offshore and seemed to be pointing at the boat. That's one of the other witnesses, Watanabe said. There were 3 joggers as well. We haven't been able to identify any of them yet, but I doubt they would give us more information than we already have. Peter said, Does that woman have something in her hand? I think she's just pointing at the boat. I don't know, Peter said. I think she has something in her hand. Watanabe said, I'll get the AV evidence guys to look at it. You might be right. What does this woman do next? Peter said. The tape started again. She leaves right away, Watanabe said. Goes up the hill and out of sight. You see there she goes now. She's hurrying. Looks like maybe she's going for help. But nobody ever saw her again. And there were no more calls logged to 911. Moments later on the tape, Eric jumped from the Boston whaler into the roiling surf. It was difficult to be sure, but he appeared to be about 30 yards offshore at the time. He didn't dive, but rather jumped feet first, vanishing into white foam. Peter watched closely to see if he emerged, but he did not seem to, and Eric had done something jarring, even disturbing. He had not put on a life jacket before he jumped. Eric knew enough to put on a life jacket in an emergency. My brother wasn't wearing a life jacket, Peter remarked. I noticed, Watanabe commented. Maybe he forgot to bring it on the boat. It happens, you know. Did he send out a mayday call on the radio? Peter asked the police officer. Eric's boat had certainly been equipped with a VHF marine radio. Eric, as an experienced boater, would have sent out a distress call on Channel 16, the channel always monitored by the Coast Guard. Coast Guard didn't hear anything. That was very strange. No life jacket, no distress call. Had Eric's radio broken down? Peter continued to stare at the heave and pulse of the blank ocean in the video. An ocean that showed no trace of his brother. After another minute, he said, "Turn it off." Watanabe stopped the camera. He was lost in the boneyard. The what? The boneyard. It's that churning wash after the waves break, where all the foam slick is boiling. He may have hit rocks in the boneyard. There are some outcrops that are out only 5-6 feet below the surface. We just don't know. He paused. Do you want to see any of it again? No, Peter said. I've seen enough. Watanabe flipped the screen shut, turned the camera off. That woman on the hill, he said casually. Do you know who she is? Me? No. She could be anybody. I wondered. You had such a strong reaction. No, sorry. I was just surprised by... It was like she just suddenly appeared, that's all. No idea who she is. Watanabe was very still. You'd tell me if you knew, he said. Sure, of course, yes. Well, thanks for your time, Watanabe gave him his card. I'll get one of the detectives to drop you at your hotel. Peter said little on the drive back. He wasn't inclined to talk, and the detective didn't press him. It was true the images of his brother vanishing in the surf were disturbing, but not as disturbing as the woman on the hill. The woman in white pointing at the boat with some object in her hand. Because that woman was Alison Bender, the CFO of Nanogen, and her presence at the scene changed everything. Chapter 5. Waikiki, 27 October, 5:45 p.m. In his hotel room, Peter Jansen lay down on top of the bed, experiencing a sense of unreality. He didn't know what to do next. Why hadn't he told Watanabe who Alison Bender was? He felt exhausted, but couldn't rest. The video kept running through his mind. He saw Alison holding something in her hand in the video, while watching Eric's death as if it meant nothing to her. And then she had hurried away. Why? He began thinking about something Rick Hutter had said to him about Erica Mole. How to check up on somebody. He took out his wallet and began going through it, pulling out cards, money. There it was, the card Rick had given him back in the lab, more than a week ago. It had Rick Hutter's handwritten on it, just the word George and a number. The guy who could access telephone records, the MIT phone hacker. It was a Massachusetts area code. He called the number. It rang for a while. It rang some more. There was no voicemail. So, Peter just let it ring. Finally, it was answered, sort of, with a grunt. Yeah. Jansen identified himself and explained what he wanted. I'm a friend of Rick Hutter. Can you get me a list of recent calls to and from a certain phone number? Yeah, why? Rick told me you could do it. I'll pay whatever you asked. Money doesn't work. I only do something if it's intriguing. A faint Latino accent, a soft voice. Peter explained the situation. A woman may be involved in my brother's death. It was the first time he'd used the word in connection with Eric. There was quite a long pause. Listen, I have the phone number that the woman used to call me. Can you find out who else she talked to on that phone? I'm assuming it's her phone. He read out Allison's number. There was an emptiness on the line, a silence that extended. Peter held his breath. Finally, George said, "Give me," pause, "a couple of hours." Peter lay back on the bed, his heart pounding. He could hear traffic going past on Kalakua Avenue, for his room faced Maka inland, across the city, and toward the mountains. The day lengthened. The sun began to go down. The room filled with shadows. Maybe Eric had reached shore. Maybe he was suffering from amnesia and would turn up in some hospital. Maybe there had been some terrible mistake. Peter had to hope, had to believe, that maybe Eric would turn up somehow, somewhere. There was always a faint chance. Or had Eric been murdered? Finally, he couldn't stand being in his room any longer, and he went outside. He sat on the beach in front of his hotel, watching the red streaks of the setting sun darken to black over the ocean. Why hadn't he told the police officer that he recognized her in the video? It had been a kind of instinct to say nothing, but why? What had made him do it? When he and Eric had been younger, they had looked out for each other. Eric had covered for him. He had covered for Eric. There you are. He turned to see Allison Bender approaching in the evening light. She wore a blue Hawaiian print dress and sandals, looking quite different than she had in Cambridge, when she'd worn a business suit and pearls. Here she looked like an innocent young girl. "Why didn't you call me? I thought you were going to call me right after you were done with the police. How did it go?" "It went okay," Peter said. "They took me to that point, Makapu'u Point, and showed me where it happened. Uh-huh. And is there any news? I mean, about Eric?" "They still haven't found him, or the body." "And the boat? What about it?" "Did the police check the boat?" "Oh, I don't know," he shrugged. "They didn't say." She sat on the sand beside him, put her hands on his shoulder. Her hand was warm. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Peter. It must have been awful for you. It was difficult." "The police had a videotape." "Videotape? Really? Did you see it?" "Yes." "And was it helpful?" Had she really not seen the video camera in the hands of the couple seated just below her on the hillside? Was it possible she was only looking at the boat? Her eyes scanned his face in the twilight. He said, "I saw Eric jump, but he never came up." "How awful," she said softly. Her hands moved to squeeze his shoulder, rub it. He wanted to tell her to stop, but he didn't trust himself to speak. The whole thing was incredibly creepy. "And what do the police think?" she said. "About what?" "About what happened. I mean, on the boat." "They think it was clogged." His cell phone rang. He fished it out of his shirt pocket, flipped it open. "Hello, this is George." "One moment," he said to Allison. "Excuse me a moment. I have to take this." He walked some distance down the beach. Stars were starting to come out in the darkening sky above. "Go ahead, George." "I have the information you want for the phone number you gave me. The number is registered to the Nanogen Microtechnologies Corporations of Honolulu. Attached to the number is the employee named Allison F. Bender." He looked back along the beach. Allison was a dark shape on the sand. "Go on," he said. "At 3:47 p.m. yesterday afternoon, local time, she called the number 646-673-2682 3 times in a row." "Whose number is that?" "It's an unassigned number for one of those junk phones you can buy and use until the prepayment runs out." "She called 3 times?" "Yes, but very briefly. 3 seconds, then 2 seconds, then 3 seconds." "Okay, meaning she didn't think she was getting through." "No, she clearly got through. No answering messages. It went right to the beep. She knew she connected. 2 possibilities. Either she kept calling because she was expecting the person to pick up, or she was triggering a device of some kind." "A device?" "Yep. You wire a cell phone to set off some device when there's an incoming call." "Okay, so 3 calls in a row. What then?" At 3:55, she called another number at Nanogen, assigned an employee named Vincent A. Drake. "You want to hear that call?" "Sure." Ringing, then the click of a pickup. "Vin, yes." "Allison." Breathless. "It's me." "Vin, yes." "Allison, listen. I'm worried. I don't know if it worked or not. There should have been smoke or something." "Vin, excuse me." "Allison, but I'm worried." "Vin, let me stop you there." "Allison, you don't understand." "Vin, yes, I do understand. Now listen. You are on the phone. I need you to speak more exactly." "Allison, oh." "Vin, you understand what I am saying?" "Allison, pause. Yes." "Vin, okay. Now, where is the object?" "Allison, pause. Not available. Vanished." "Vin, okay. That I don't see a problem." "Allison, I am still worried." "Vin, but the object did not reappear?" "Allison, no." "Vin, then I suggest there is no problem. We can discuss this further in person, but not now. Are you coming back now?" "Allison, yes." "Vin, all right. See you soon." Click. George said, "There are 2 other calls. Want to hear them? Maybe later. Okay. I've emailed them to you as .rave files. You should be able to listen to them on your computer. Thanks. Peter looked back at Allison and shivered. Can I take this to the police? No way in hell, George said. You need a court order to access this stuff. You take it to them, you ruin any chances of prosecution. Illegal search and seizure. Also, you'll, put me in a jam. Then what should I do? Yeah. George grunted. I don't know. Get them to confess? How? Sorry, can't help you there, George said. But if you need more phone records, call any time. And he hung up. Peter walked back to Allison, feeling a cold sweat on his body. It was getting dark now. Her expression was impossible to read. She sat very still on the sand. He heard her say, Is everything all right? Yes, fine. In fact, Peter felt as if he was drowning, overwhelmed by onrushing events. All his life he had been a student, and until now, he felt his life experiences had given him a clear, even cynical sense of his fellow human beings and what they were capable of. Over the years, he'd had to deal with cheating students dispensing sexual favors in exchange for grades, students falsifying their results, and with professors who appropriated student work. In one bizarre instance, there had been a thesis advisor on heroin. He felt at the age of 23 like a man who had seen it all. Not anymore. The idea of murder, that someone would, with calculation, try to kill his brother, left him shaking and sweating and cold. He didn't trust himself to speak to this woman, who was supposed to be his brother's girlfriend, but who had evidently plotted against him. No tears from this girlfriend. She didn't seem upset at all. She said, You're awfully quiet, Peter. It's been a long day. Buy you a drink? No thanks. My ties are famous here. I think I'd better call it a night. Have you had dinner? Not hungry. She got up from the sand. Brush yourself off. I know you must be upset. I am too. Yes. Why so cold towards me? I'm just trying to... I'm sorry, he said quickly. He didn't want her to suspect anything. That would be unwise, even dangerous. It's all been such a shock. She put her hand up, touched his cheek. Call me if I can do anything. Thanks. Okay. They walked back inside the hotel. All your friends are arriving tomorrow, she said. They're upset about what happened to Eric. But the tour of the facilities is all arranged. Do you want to go on it? Absolutely, he said. I can't just sit around feeling like this, waiting. The tour will start at the Raipaka Arboretum in Manoa Valley, in the mountains near here, she said. That's where we get a lot of our rainforest materials for research. 4 o'clock tomorrow. Should I pick you up? That's not necessary, Peter said. I'll take a cab. He somehow managed to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Thanks for coming by, Allison. It means a lot." "I just want to help." She looked at him, doubtfully. "And you are helping," he said. "Believe me, you are." Unable to sleep, unable to eat, tormented by George's information, Peter Jansen stood at the balcony of his room. The view looked away from the ocean, across the city, and up into a jumble of mountain peaks, wild and black without lights, outlined only by stars in the night sky. Allison Bender had made 3 brief calls to the phone number. The time of these calls, 3:47 p.m., stuck in his mind. Late afternoon. He remembers that the video shot by the couple had been time-stamped. He tried to recall the timestamp. He had a head for numbers. He used numbers constantly in his data sets. The timestamp rose in his mind's eye. 3:50 something. Just 3 minutes after Allison made those calls. Eric's boat was stalled in the video. Wait, what about that text message from Eric? When did that come in? He went indoors and got his phone and scrolled through the call log. The text, "Don't come," had arrived at 9:49 p.m. Eastern Time. There was a 6-hour time difference between the East Coast and Hawaii. It meant that Eric had sent the text at 3:49 p.m. He had sent it just 2 minutes after Allison Bender had made 3 calls through a disposable cell phone. It was only a 2-word text, "Don't come." That was because Eric had been in a life-or-death crisis and had not had any time to send a longer text. Eric had sent the text from his boat while he was struggling to get the engine started, moments before he had jumped overboard. Peter's hands were clammy, and his phone almost slipped from his fingers. He stared at the words, "Don't come." He was reading his brother's last words. Chapter 6. Ala Honolulu, 28 October, 8 o'clock a.m. Akamai Boat Services was right on Ala Moana Boulevard, next to Ala Rai Boat Basin, at the end of Rakiki Beach. The taxi dropped Peter off at 8 in the morning, but the boat yard was already busy at work. It wasn't a large yard, perhaps 10 or 12 holes out of the water, and it took him no time to locate the Boston whaler. He was here because of Allison's question the night before. Did the police check the boat? Why would she ask that? Supposedly, she was concerned about her boyfriend, yet she seemed to care more about the boat. He jumped off the boat. Peter walked around the boat now, looking closely. Considering the pounding it had taken in the surf, the Boston whaler seemed surprisingly intact. True, the right fiberglass hull was scratched all over, as if it had been clawed by giant hands, A jagged rip ran several feet along the starboard hull, and a chunk had been whacked out of the bow. Whalers were famous for their ability to float, even if the hull was broken into pieces. His brother had had years of experience with whalers. Eric would have known the boat hadn't been in danger of sinking. Certainly, the damage to the boat did not justify Eric's abandoning it. Plainly, his brother shouldn't have jumped. He would have been safer staying on board. So why did he jump? Panic? Confusion? Something else? There was a wooden ladder on the far side of the boat, and he climbed up onto the stern. All hatches and the door to the cuddy cabin were sealed with yellow crime scene tape. He wanted to look at the outboard engines, but they were sealed as well. "Can I help you?" a man below shouting up, heavy-set, grizzled, streaks of grease on his work clothes. Dirty baseball cap shaded his eyes. "Oh, hi," Peter said. "My name is Peter Jansen. This is my brother's boat." "Uh-huh. What are you doing here?" "Well, I wanted to see." "You illiterate?" the man said. "No, I'm..." "Well, it seems like you must be, because that sign over there says, plain as day, all the visitors register at the main office." "Are you a visitor?" "I guess." "Why didn't you register?" "I just thought I could." "Wrong. You can't. Now what the hell are you doing up there?" "This is my brother's..." "I heard you the first time. Your brother's boat. You see all that yellow tape?" "I know you do. And I also know you can read it, 'cause you told me you're not illiterate. Isn't that right?" "Yes." "So that's a crime scene. And you got no business up there. Now, you get the hell down right away, and go to the office and register, and show us some identification." "You have identification?" "Yes." "Okay then. Get down off of there, and stop wasting my time." The man stalked off. Peter climbed down the ladder on the far side of the boat. As he came near the ground, he heard a gruff male voice said, "Can I help you, miss?" And a woman's voice answered, "Yes, I'm looking for a Boston whaler the Coast Guard brought in." It was Allison's voice. He paused, hidden from view by the hull of the boat. "God damn," the man said. "What is it about that fricking boat? Gets more visitors than a rich uncle on his deathbed." "How's that?" she said. "Well, yesterday, some guy shows up claiming it was his boat. Said he had no identification. So I told him to get lost. The things people try. Then this morning, we had some young guy claiming it was his brother's boat. I had to get him out of the cockpit. And now we got you. What is it about that boat?" "I really couldn't say," Allison said. "Myself, I just left something on that boat, and I wanted to get it back." "No chance of that. Not unless you got a letter of authorization from the police." "Do you?" "Well, no. Sorry, that's a crime scene. Like I told the young guy." "Where is this guy?" she asked. "He was coming down the ladder, probably still on the other side of the boat." "He'll be along want to come inside the office? Why would I do that? We can call the police. See if they'll give you a waiver to get your stuff off the boat. That seems like a lot of trouble. It's just it's my watch. I took it off my wrist. No trouble. I guess I could buy another one. It did cost a bit. I thought it would be easy. Well, suit yourself. But you still better sign in. I don't see why you're supposed to. I don't think so, she said. I don't want to get mixed up in any police thing. Peter waited a few minutes, then heard the man say, You can come out, son. He came out from behind the hall. There was no sign of Allison in the yard. The heavy-set man looked at him quizzically, head cocked to one side. Didn't want to run into her? We don't get along, Peter said. I figured. You want me to sign in? The man nodded slowly. Yes, please. So Peter went into the office and signed in. He couldn't see what difference it made. Allison Bender already knew he had gone to the boat, and therefore she already knew he suspected something. From this point on, he would have to move fast. By the end of the day, he thought he had to be finished. He went back to his hotel room, where he found an email from George on his laptop, with no text. Instead, there were 3 .wav files, sent as attachments. One was a recording of Allison Bender's call to Vin Drake, and there were 2 new files. He listened to them. They were recordings of 2 phone calls Allison had made from a cell phone in the hours after Eric had disappeared. Both calls seemed fairly routine. In the first call, Allison had phoned somebody, perhaps in a Nanogen purchasing department, and asked for a new budget breakdown. In the second call, she had spoken briefly with another person, a man, perhaps an accountant, on the subject of expenses. Allison, Omicron has lost 2 more prototypes. Other person, what happened? Allison, they didn't tell me. Vin Drake wants you to account for this as an ordinary research expense, not a capital write-down. Other person, the loss of 2 hellstorms? Well, that's a big cost. The Davros people. Allison, just call it research, okay? Other person, of course. Peter saved the files after listening to them, but they didn't make sense or reveal anything he could use. He also saved the telephone conversation between Allison and Vin. However, which would be very useful, he downloaded it onto a flash memory stick and slipped the stick into his pocket, and then burned a CD of the same conversation. Then he took the CD to the hotel business center and had them print a professional label that signed Nanogen Data 5.0 1028. When he was finished, he checked his watch. It was shortly after 11 in the morning. He went down to the terrace to have a late breakfast and sit in the sun. Over coffee and eggs, he realized he was making a lot of assumptions. The most important assumption was that Nanogen would have a conference room equipped with the usual electronic equipment. That seemed a safe enough bet. All high-tech companies had such rooms. Second, he assumed that the tour would move all the graduate students together, en masse, instead of breaking them into smaller groups or taking them around individually. But he suspected that Vin Drake would give the tour himself, and Vin liked an audience. The bigger the better. Also, if everybody stayed together, it would be easier for Nanjin to control exactly how much information they were given. For Peter, it was important that the students be kept together, because he felt he needed as many witnesses as possible for what he was planning to do. Or should he try to stage it in front of just one or two witnesses? No, his mind raced. No. Try to provoke a blow-up in front of many people. That might be the best way, he thought, to get Drake's facade to crack, and perhaps reveal what Drake and Alison had done to his brother. Finally, he had to hope that Drake would lose his cool, or at least that Alison would, especially if they were primed in a way that made them nervous, and thought he knew how to do that. If he pulled it off, Drake or Alison might get very upset in front of the grad students. And that was what he wanted. Chapter 7. Waipaka Arboretum, 28 October, 3 o'clock p.m. The taxi drove away from the ocean, and soon was climbing steeply into the hills. Broad acacia trees shaded the road. That's the University on both sides, the driver said. He pointed to featureless grey buildings that looked like condominiums. Peter saw no students. Where's everybody? Those are dorms. They're at class now. They passed a baseball field, a surrounding residential area, small homes, bungalow style. But as they drove on, the houses thinned, and the trees grew larger. Now they were heading towards a green mountain wall, heavily forested, rising 2,000 feet into the air in front of them. That's Kuolu Pali, the driver said. No houses up there? No. You can't build nothing there. That's straight up crumbly volcanic rock. Can't climb it or nothing. You come way back here like we do now. You leave the city, you in wilderness now. Too much rain, Maka side. Near the mountain. Nobody lives back here. What about the Arboretum? Half-mile up this road, the driver said. The road was now a single lane, dark beneath a heavy covering of towering dense trees. Nobody come here, neither. Folks go to Foster or the other pretty arboretums. You sure you want to come here? Yes, Peter said. The road narrowed and climbed zigzagging along a steep jungle-clad mountainside. A car came up behind them on the twisting road and honked, and roared past them. People in the car waving and yelling. He blinked. The grad students from the lab were crammed into the car. a midnight blue Bentley convertible sedan. The taxi driver muttered something about crazy lobsters. Lobsters? Peter asked. Tourists. Where they burn. Soon the road arrived at a security gate. Steel, massive, new. It stood open directly in front of a tunnel. A sign warned unauthorized persons to keep out. The driver slowed the taxi, brought it to a stop before the gate and tunnel. They've been doing some changes up here. Why you want to go in this place, he said. It's business, Peter said. Even so, looking at the tunnel, he got an uneasy feeling. With the steel gate in front of it, it seemed like a tunnel of no return. Peter wondered if the gate was to keep people out, or was it to lock people in? The driver sighed, and took off his sunglasses, and drove into the tunnel. It was a narrow, single-lane passage cut through a shoulder blade of the mountain. The road emerged into a pocket valley. The valley was deeply forested, and walled in by the slopes and cliffs of the Hualu Pali. Waterfalls trailed from misty jungle mountains. The road descended and they came into a clearing, dominated by a large, glass-roofed shed. In front of the shed were a few parking spaces in a muddy area. Van Drake and Alison Bender were already there, standing next to a red BMW sports car. They both wore boots and hiking clothes. The students were piling out of the Bentley. They became less boisterous when Peter stepped from the taxi. Sorry, Peter. Sorry about your brother. Yes, sorry. Any news? Erica kissed his cheek, took his arm. I'm so sorry. The police are still investigating, Peter said. Van Drake shook his hand with a firm grip. I don't have to tell you this is a great, great tragedy. If it proves true, and I hope to God it does not, it's a dreadful loss to all of us personally. To say nothing of a terrible setback to our company, which Eric was such a part of. I am so sorry, Peter. Thank you, Peter said. It's good the police are investigating. Yes, Peter said. They haven't given up lost hope. Quite the contrary, Peter said. It seems they're taking a new interest in Eric's boat. Something about a missing cell phone. One that may have broken up inside the engine compartment. I didn't really follow what they told me. A cell phone in the engine compartment? Vin frowned. I wonder what that could. As I said, I didn't really follow, Peter said. I don't know why they would think there was a phone there. Perhaps my brother dropped his. I don't know. But they're also going to check phone records. Phone records? Ah, yes, good. No stone unturned. Had Vin turned paler? Peter couldn't be sure. Alison licked her lips nervously. Were you able to sleep, Peter? Yes, thanks. I took a pill. Oh, good. Well, Van Drake rubbed his hands, turned to the others. At any rate, welcome to the Manoa Valley. What do you say we get to the business at hand? Gather round, people, and I will give you your first insight into how nitrogen works. Drake led them from the parking lot toward the forest. They passed a low shed housing earth-moving machinery. Although, as Drake said, you've probably never seen machines like this before. Notice how small they are. To Peter, the machine looks like the tiny golf carts, fitted with a miniature backhoe, with an antenna drooping over the top. These diggers, Drake went on, are specially manufactured for us by Siemens Precisions AG, a German company. The machine is able to precision dig soil with millimeter accuracy, which is then placed in the flats you see in the back of the shed. Those flats are 30 centimeters square, about a foot square, and either 3 or 6 centimeters deep. And what about the antenna? As you see, the antenna hangs directly over the backhoe. The antennas enable us to locate precisely where to dig and to keep a record in our data files of the exact place where the sample of soil came from. This will all be clear as the days goes on. Meanwhile, let's look at the site. They plunged into the forest itself, the ground suddenly uneven beneath their feet. The trail narrowed, and twisting among the giant trees overhead. The massive trunks were wrapped with broadleaf vines. The ground was covered with plants and bushes to knee height, and the overall impression was of 1,000 shades of green. The light filtering through the tree canopy overhead was pale yellow-green. Drake began. This may look like a natural rainforest. It doesn't, Rick Hudger said. And it's not. That's correct. It's not. This area has been cultivated since the 1920s, when it was an experimental station for Ohio farmers, and more recently for ecological studies run by the university. But in recent years, nobody has bothered with this tract, and the land reverted to a more natural state. We call this area Fern Gully. He turned and walked down the trail, while the students followed him, going slowly and looking at things occasionally, stopping to examine a plant or a flower. Moving along now, Drake went on, speaking briskly. You'll notice a profusion of ferns. Prominently around us you see the big trees ferns, Cybotium and Sagillaria, and lower down to the ground the smaller Plectrum, Lycopodium, and of course, he indicated the mountainside with a stripe of his hand. Up there the Uluhe ferns, which cover the mountain slopes over much of Hawaii. You missed that Uluhe ferns right at your feet, Ricardo broke in. It's called Diquanopterus, also known as false staghorn. I believe so, Vindrick said, barely concealing a flash of irritation. He paused and bent down on one knee. The Pihali ferns line this path. The larger ones are Makure ferns, which spiders like to live on. You will notice a large number of spiders here, some 23 species in all, are represented in this small area alone. He stopped in a clearing, where trees opened into views of the mountainsides around the valley. He pointed up to a peak on a ridge overlooking the valley. That peak is called Tantalus. It's an extinct volcanic crater that looks down on this valley. We've been conducting research at Tantalus crater, as well as here in the valley. Alison Bender fell into step alongside Peter Jansen. "Did the police contact you today?" she said. "No," he said. "Why?" "I wondered how you knew they were searching the boat and the phone records." Oh, in truth, he had made that up. Well, it was on the news. Was it? I didn't hear. What channel? I don't remember. 5, I think. Ricardo came over and said, "Really sorry, Peter. Really sorry, man." Jenny Lind had been walking close behind Vin Drake, and she had said to him, "But I don't understand your research program. Like what you're actually doing here in this forest." Drake smiled at her and said, "It's because I haven't explained it yet. In simple terms, we are planning to collect samples from a cross-section of the Hawaiian ecosystem, from Tantalus Crater, down into the Manoa Valley, where we are standing." "Collect what kind of samples?" Rick Hutter said, hands on his hips. He was wearing the usual Rick outfit, jeans and an outdoor shirt, sleeves rolled up and now damp with sweat, looking as if he was on a bush rack through deep jungle. He had the usual combative look on his face, too. His jaw-set eyes narrowed. Drake smiled and answered, essentially, "We will collect samples from every species of living thing in this ecosystem." "What for?" Rick went on. He stared straight at Vin Drake. Drake stared right back at Rick. A cold look, then smiled. "A rainforest is the greatest repository of active chemical compounds in nature. We are standing in the middle of a gold mine full of potential new drugs. Drugs that could save uncounted human lives. Drugs worth uncounted billions of dollars. This forest, Mr. Hutter," Rick said. "This lush forest, Mr. Hutter, contains keys to the health and well-beings of every person on this planet. And yet this forest has barely been explored. We have no idea what chemical compounds actually exist here. In the plants, in the animals, and the microscopic life forms. This forest is terra incognita, absolutely unknown terrain. It's as vast as full of riches and as unexplored as the New World was for Christopher Columbus. Our goal, Ms. Harder, is simple. Our goal is drug discovery. We are searching for new drugs on a vast scale, beyond anything imagined. We have begun a total screening of this entire forest for bioactive compounds, from Tantalus to the bottom of this valley. The payoff will be huge. The payoff, Rick echoed. Gold mine, new world. So it's a gold rush you're talking about, isn't it, Mr. Drake? It's all about money. That's much too crude, Drake answered. First and foremost, medicine is about saving lives. It's about ending suffering and helping every person reach their human potential. He switched his attention to the others and began walking along the trail, getting himself away from Ricardo, who obviously annoyed him. Rick, now standing with his arms folded, murmured to Ken King, "The guy is a modern Spanish conquistador. He's looting this ecosystem for gold." Ken gave him a scornful look. "And just what are you doing with your natural extracts, Rick? You're boiling the hell out of tree bark, looking for new drugs. Why is that any different?" "The difference," he said to her, "is the huge sums of money involved. And know where the money is in all this is, right? It's in patents. Nitrogen will take out thousands of patents on the compounds they find here, and giant drug companies will exploit the patents, earning billions. You're just jealous, 'cause you don't have any patents." Karen turned away from Rick, while Rick glared at her. He called after her, "I'm not doing science to get rich. Unlike you, apparently." He realized she was ignoring him pointedly. Denny Minot struggled at the tail end of the group. For some reason, Danny had brought his tweed jacket to Hawaii, and he was wearing it now. Sweat poured down Danny's neck and drenched his button-down shirt, and he skidded from place to place on the trail in tassels loafers. He blotted in his face with a pocket square and pretended to ignore his misery. "Mr. Drake," he said, "if you happen to be familiar with post-structuralist theory, you might be aware of how we can't actually know anything about this forest. For you see, we create meaning, Mr. Drake, when really there is no meaning in nature." Drake seemed unfazed by Danny. "My view of nature, Mr. Minot, is that we don't need to know the meaning of nature in order to make use of it." "Yes, but," Danny went on. Meanwhile, Alison Bender drifted back a few paces, and Peter ended up walking with Rick. Rick nodded toward Vin Drake. "Do you believe this guy? He's like Mr. Biopiracy." "I've been listening to your remarks, Mr. Hader," Drake said, twisting his head around suddenly, "and I have to say it's completely false. Biopiracy refers to the takings of indigenous plants without compensating the country of origin. The concept is attractive to the ill-informed do-gooder, but fraught with practical difficulty. Take the example of Carrera, a valuable medicinal drug used in modern medicines today. Surely someone should be compensated, yet there are dozens of different recipes for Carrera, developed by many tribal groups stretching across Central and South America, a vast area. The Carreras differ in ingredients and cooking time, depending on what is meant to be killed and on local preferences. How then do you compensate native medicine's men? Do the shamans of Brazil do more valuable work than the shamans of Panama or Colombia? Does it matter that the trees used in Colombia migrated or were transplanted from native Panama? What about the actual formula? Is the additions of strychnos important or not? How about the addition of a rusty nail? Is there any consideration for public domain? We allow a drug company 20 years to exploit a drug, then make it public. Some say Sir Walter Raleigh brought Korea back to Europe in 1596. Certainly, it was well known in the 1700s. Burroughs Wellcome sold Korea tablets in the 1880s for medical purposes. So by all odds, Korea belongs in the public domain. And finally, modern surgeons no longer use Korea from native plants anyway. They use synthetic Korea. You see the complexities? This is all corporate evasiveness, Rick said. Mr. Hutter, you seem to enjoy being the devil's advocate against my points, Drake said. I don't mind. It helps me sharpen my arguments. The truth is, using natural compounds for medicines is just the way of the world. The discoveries of every culture are valuable, and other cultures borrow from one another. Sometimes discoveries are traded for a price, but not always. Should we license the horse stirrup from the Mongols who invented it? Should we pay the Chinese for domesticated silk production? For opium, should we track down the modern descendants of Neolithic farmers of 10,000 years ago, who first domesticated food crops in the Fertile Crescents, and pay them? How about the medieval Britons, who learned to smelt iron? Let's move on, Erica Mole said. We take your point even if Rick doesn't. Okay, the point is that claims for biopiracy of plants really can't occur in Hawaii, because there are, strictly speaking, no indigenous plants. These are mid-Pacific volcanic islands that rose from the surface of the ocean as barren, hot lava plains, and everything growing on them now has been brought from elsewhere, by birds, by wind, by ocean currents, by Polynesian warriors' canoes. Nothing indigenous, although some species are endemic. The legalities of the situation are one reason why, in fact, we have located our company in Hawaii. Evading the law, Rick mumbled. Obeying the law, Drake said. That's the point. They were coming to an area of chest-high green leaves, and Drake said, Now we call this area Ginger Lane, with right yellow and kahili ginger. Kahili has those foot-long red stems. The trees above us here are mostly sandalwood, with the typical deep red flowers. But there are also soapberry and mallow trees, with large dark green leaves. The students were turning, looking in all directions. I assume you're all familiar with this, but in case you're not, this spiky striped leaf
is Olander, and it would kill a human being. One local man died from grilling meat over a fire on an Olander stick. Children sometimes eat the fruits and die. In addition, the very large tree off to your left is a strychnine tree, originally from India. All parts are fatal, the seeds most of all. Next to it, that tall shrub
with the star-shaped leaf is the castor bean plant, also fatally toxic. But at very low doses, castor bean compounds may have medicinal properties. I assume you know that, Mr. Hutter. Of course, Rick said. Castor bean extracts have potentially to improve memory functions, as well as antibiotic properties. Rick turned at a fork, following a path that went down to the right. Finally, here we have Bromelade Alley, he said. About 80 varieties of this plant family, which, as you know, includes the pineapple bromeliads, harbor a great range of insects life as well. The trees around us are primarily eucalyptus and acacia, but further on we have the more typical rainforest trees, ohia, and koa, as you will see from the curved leaves littering the trail. And why are we being shown all this? Jenny Lynn asked. Amerson joined in. Exactly. I'm curious about the technology, Mr. Drake. How do you take samples from so many different living things? Especially when you consider that almost all living things are very small. Bacteria, worms, insects, and so forth. I mean, how many biosamples are you collecting and processing per hour, per day? Our laboratory sends a truck to this rainforest every day, Trick said, to pick up precision-cut flats of earth, or a selection of plants, or whatever else our researchers have asked for. So we can expect to have fresh research materials brought to you daily, and in general, to be provided with whatever you ask for. They come here every day, Rick said. That's right. About 2 p.m. We just missed them. Jenny Lynn crouched down. What's this? She said, pointing to the ground. It seemed to be a small tent, about the size of a palm, covering a small concrete box. I saw another one just like it, a short distance back. Ah, yes, Rick said. Excellent observation, Miss Lynn. Those tents are scattered throughout the rainforest in this area. They are supply stations. I'll explain that to all of you later. In fact, if you are ready to leave, I think it's time you learned what Nanogen is all about. They began to circle back towards the parking lot, skirting a small brownish pond with overhanging palm fronds and small bromeliads lining the edges. This is Palhana Pond, Drake said. Means work is done. Strange name for a duck pond, Danny said. Because that's what it is. I saw 3 or 4 families of ducklings here before. And did you see what happens? Drake said. Danny shook his head no. Is this going to upset me? That depends. Look in the fronds. and about 3 feet above the water. The group paused, stared. Karen King saw it first. "Grey heron," she whispered, nodding. "A dusty grey bird, standing about 3 feet tall, with a spiky head and dull eyes. It looked unkempt and lazy. It was absolutely motionless, and it blended perfectly into the shadows of the palm foliage. "It can stay that way for hours," Karen said. They watched for several minutes and were about to leave when one of the ducklings' families began to scut around the edge of the pond. They kept their bodies half hidden in the overhanging waterside grasses, but to no avail. In a swift motion, the heron left its perch, splashed among the ducks, and resumed its perch, this time with tiny duck feet protruding from its jaws. "Ew, Danny." "Yuck, Jenny." The heron threw back his head, looking straight up in a single flip motion, gulped down the remains of the duckling. It then lowered its head and turned motionless again. In the shadows, it had all taken place in a few seconds. It was hard to believe it had happened at all. "That's disgusting," Jenny said. "It's the way of the world," Drake said. "You'll notice the Arboretum is not overrun with ducks. And that's the reasons why. If I am not mistaken, here are our cars, waiting to take us back to civilization."